All right. So welcome again, everybody. As I said in the email invite, on Wednesday evening, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, or FFCRA, as it's quickly becoming known as, was passed into law. And so today we're going to go through a number of different items and what the employer's responsibilities are with this. Make sure we have kind of a basic understanding of the FFCRA and how this is going to affect us, and what this how this will affect us based on some of the things that we put into motion this past week. So first of all, though, for a moment of levity, I just want to remind everybody to find some good travel ideas for this weekend, and you can either hang out in the bedroom, hang out in the living room, maybe do some cooking in the kitchen, but have some good travel time this weekend. All right, so down to business. So the first and foremost thing that we need to know about FFCRA is that it does not go into effect until April 2nd. So, so while we're still in kind of this transition period, this gives us about 2 weeks to really make some decisions, if we haven't already, and figure out how we want to address either FFCRA or our employees as overall. This is a short-term proposal or short-term legislation, and it will end as of December 31st, 2020, as of right now. Depending on how things go, that might be extended, but as the way the legislation is written, it will end at the end of the year. It covers all employers with 500 or less employees. So whether you have 1 employee or 499, you're covered under this. The anticipation, from what I've heard from a couple other things that I've read and listened to, is that they're hoping that companies that are larger than 500 employees will have some social pressure to put these similar things in place going forward. This act creates a paid leave benefit for employees that are impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic in 2 different ways. The first one is a federal emergency paid sick leave, and throughout the rest of the program, I'm going to talk about EPSL, just to shorten that. And the second is an expansion of the Federal Family Medical Leave Act. And the employer will be responsible for paying these benefits to the employees and will be reimbursed 100% through tax credits. And that can be expected to be seen through quarterly or annual credits. So first we're going to talk specifically about the EPSL. As I said, this goes into effect as of April 2nd, 2020. This is for any employee that is active and is working as of April 2nd, 2020. And I say that specifically because we've worked with a number of clients who have already started to furlough staff and have had to lay staff off. And so those people are no longer active and working employees. So this actually will not affect those people. The employer must provide all employees with up to 10 days of paid sick leave if they are unable to work or telework for any of the following reasons. The first one is that the employee is subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19. It's important to note that it's a quarantine or isolation as defined by the CDC. So the current shelter-in-place order does not apply to this. The second item is the employee is advised by a healthcare provider or to self-quarantine. So this is somebody who was exposed to COVID or may have been exposed to COVID and is therefore under self-quarantine. You can require medical certification for this, but you want to be aware and be compassionate that the employee may have difficulty getting that because of the overwhelm that's going on with hospitals and with doctors right now. The third is that employees are experiencing symptoms of COVID-19, and again, you can require medical certification for this with the same caveat as in number 2. Number 4 is that the employee is caring for an individual who is under a quarantine or isolation order or who has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine. Again, the current shelter in place doesn't apply to this, and it's as defined by the CDC. Number 5 is that the employee is caring for a child whose school has been closed or whose child care provider is unavailable due to COVID-19 precautions. This is probably where the majority of people are going to be affected because of the fact that schools are basically closed through the end of the school year now and won't reopen until the fall. And then number 6 is the employee is experiencing any other substantially similar conditions specified by the Secretary of Health and Human Services in consultation with the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of Labor. This is the all-encompassing bucket that they've kind of built in case there is a different epidemic or pandemic or something different that comes out or some issue related to COVID-19, but that they can't foresee right now. So they wanted to leave that door open. So what does the employee get paid? So if the employee uses the paid sick leave for any of the first 3 reasons, so that was that they were on quarantine or they got sick or they were told to self-quarantine, then the employee must be paid their regular rate of pay up to a maximum of $511 per day. And that's for 10 days. If an employee uses it for reasons 4, 5, or 6, they must be paid at least 2/3 of their regular rate of pay up to a maximum of $200 per day or $2,000 in aggregate. The EPSL will be in addition to any existing paid leave policies that the employer has in place and should be used before any of those other policies. So you should use the federal EPSL first, and then they can use their city or state sick leave and or vacation and PTO. So there's also been question about the exemptions for small businesses. The Secretary of Labor has the authority to issue regulations exempting small businesses with fewer than 50 employees when the imposition would jeopardize the viability of the business as an ongoing concern. As of right now, the Secretary of Labor has not issued any exemptions. However, we still have until April 2nd for this law to go into effect. And so we might see something within the next couple of weeks that comes down with exemptions for that. The EPSL is set to expire on December 31st. Any unused EPSL will not carry over to the next year and will not be paid out on termination. So just like regular sick leave, you're not going to have to pay this out if the person terminates before the end of this year, and it will expire as of the end of the year. There will be a model notice published by the Secretary of Labor, and that will need to be posted in the workplace or sent out to employees who are working remotely. We can definitely help with that, and we'll make sure that this gets sent out to people as we receive it. It has not been published yet. So the second part of the FFCRA is the expansion of the Family Medical Leave Act. And so this expands, again, we're still talking about employers that have 500 or less employees. So FMLA, for those who aren't familiar with it, generally only applies to employers with 50 or more employees. This new expansion will cover all employers with that have 500 or less employees, and it expands it so that it can be used for a qualifying need through December 31st, 2020, and that qualifying need is defined as an employee that is unable to work or telework due to the need to care for their child whose school has been closed or whose child care provider is unavailable due to COVID-19. So again, this is a very small section. So it is just for caring for the child whose school has closed. In a later slide, we're going to talk a little bit about FFCRA and the fact that COVID-19 is considered an illness under a covered illness under FFCRA, and therefore I'm assuming that it's also covered under FMLA. So that would be for standard FMLA coverage if the employer has 50 or more employees. But this is the component that is just for employers that have less than, or that have 500 or less employees. So basically all small businesses. To be eligible for this part of the FFCRA, the employees need to have worked for the company for at least 30 days. The leave can be taken intermittently, so if an employee has somebody that's available to care for the child 3 days a week, but they need to take time off 2 days a week, then they can do that. The leave under this temporary provision will be compensated. The first 2 weeks of leave will be unpaid, and this would line up with the EPSL so that they would get paid under the sick leave portion for the first 2 weeks. The employer, after the first 2 weeks, the employer must pay the additional 10 weeks. An employee may, but cannot be required to use vacation or sick leave during the initial unpaid 2 weeks. So they're assuming that they would use that EPSL. And then beginning the 3rd week, the employee must be paid at least 2/3 of the employee's regular rate of pay, up to a maximum of $200 per day or $10,000 in aggregate. Under this entitlement, the employees are entitled to reinstatement at the same or equivalent position upon exhausting their FMLA, unless the employer has less than 25 employees. So for the smaller employers with less than 25, no reinstatement is required if the following conditions apply: that the employee's job no longer exists due to economic conditions or other operating conditions caused by COVID-19. So if you've eliminated the position, or if you're downsizing to a point where the position just no longer exists, then you would not need to reinstate them. The employer would need to make a reasonable attempt to restore the employee to an equivalent position. And if they're not able to do that, the employer must make a reasonable effort for at least a year to contact the employee if an equivalent position becomes available. So you want to make sure that as things start to rebuild and you start to hire people, that you're reaching out to somebody in this case and seeing if they'd like to rejoin your team. As with the EPSL, the Secretary of Labor has the authority to issue exemptions for small businesses, and as of right now, those have not been issued. With companies that are currently eligible or covered under FMLA, it's also important to realize that this is an expansion of the normal FMLA, so it doesn't impact existing provisions. And if somebody is currently on an FMLA leave for any reason, that FMLA leave time is will reduce the amount of time they have available under the COVID-19 expansion. So if somebody has already used 6 weeks of FMLA time due to a pregnancy or a personal injury, now they only would have 6 weeks available to them if they needed to use this for childcare. As I said, under the CFRA, which is the California Leave Act, the California Family Rights Act, and also the Americans with Disabilities Act, there are some things to consider with the COVID-19. As I said, COVID-19 will qualify as a serious health condition, and if it results in inpatient care or continuing treatment or supervision by a healthcare provider. And so that is for all employers that have 50 or more employees. Under ADA, which in California affects all employers with 5 or more employees, the employer may be required to provide telework or unpaid leave as an accommodation to employees with illnesses related to COVID-19. So I also wanted to kind of circle back to the work furloughs and pay reductions that we talked about, that I talked about in a webinar earlier this week. Just remember that furlough is basically an unpaid leave or a temporary layoff, and a pay reduction for either for hourly or salaried employees may happen for to reduce the cost to the employer. Because of the things that are going into place, you may want to consider enacting any furloughs or pay reductions before the FFCRA goes into place on April 2nd. You also want to make sure that you're very clear that if people are on furlough, that if you're offering to allow them to use any paid vacation during the furlough time, if you are allowing them to use that, then you want to make sure you're paying that out at the employee's regular rate of pay before the furlough. And but you can say that the vacation time cannot be used during a furlough as you're trying to reduce costs and expenses. I also wanted to speak in general to managing remote workers. As people are starting to shift to remote, some companies that we're working with have never really dealt with remote workers before. And it's important to set expectations for productivity. Some things I've talked to clients about is making sure that you're checking in regularly with employees, whether you're setting up a team call at the beginning of the day or a couple times throughout the day. Jumping on Zoom. Zoom is a great tool because it has a free option if you're just doing one-on-one meetings or you're doing a short meeting with a group. You can do that for free. Also, be aware of childcare considerations. Now that people are working from home, it's not just them. They have their children. They may have their children at home. They may have to deal with interruptions and try and accommodate them as best you can. Make sure that employees have the technology required to do their job. If they need things, like some people don't have internet. I know a lot of the internet providers are trying to help out with lower income people so that they can get that. But if you need to provide them with a hotspot or something where they have the internet available to them so that they can do their work. It's also important if you are having hourly employees work from home or work remotely, you're still maintaining the wage and hour rules, making sure that they're taking their rest and meal breaks. They're not working over 8 hours a day without being able to get overtime for that. Some other things to keep in mind, like I said, get your tech in order. Ensure that internet bandwidth is sufficient. Make sure they're creating schedules for their kids. Communicating and managing expectations to families and colleagues of when they're available and staying connected. And this I saw from one of the myriad of emails that I have received over the past week, is just an idea of how to keep some sanity during this time. Is to, use your normal commute time to prepare healthy foods, go for a walk, read a book, learn something new. Make sure that you're reaching out to people. I've met with people. I've continued to do one-on-one networking with people where we've met via Zoom and GoToMeeting, getting on the phone with people. But really, in this time, it's important not to isolate ourselves and to make sure that we're available and out there for everybody. So that is all the information I have for you today. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, I'm happy to open it up and answer anything. If you, whether you want to chat or I think you can raise your hand and ask questions as well. Any questions? Is everybody just exhausted from the roller coaster week?
Sandra asked, can an employee be eligible for more than one leave act?
Under this, they can be eligible for the sick leave and for the FMLA leave. The paid portion of the FMLA would go into effect after the sick leave would be paid out. Adam, I'm going to allow you to talk. Adam? Adam, did you have a question? I'm not hearing you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
Hi.
sorry. Can you just confirm that if someone is furloughed, they are or they are not eligible for EPSL or FMLA?
If they are already furloughed as of April 2nd, they will not be eligible for EPSL or FMLA. They will not.
They will not. Okay, so if
they're not an active employee.
If we think someone might be a good option for FMLA, meaning that they have kids, they're probably not going to work for 12 weeks, would it be a good plan to unfurlough them, have them as an employee, and then after April 2nd, they can FMLA and get 2 weeks unpaid and then 10 weeks paid?
So somebody that basically you want them to be able to work. Well, so you're saying that they would strictly be telecommuting, or they would not be able to telecommute, but they'd need to take care of their child?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, you could potentially do that, yes. As long as they've worked for 30 days and yeah, so if they're not furloughed as of April 2nd, they can apply for, and they would get paid, the first 2 weeks would be paid under sick leave, under the EPSL, because they're taking care of a child. And then after that, they would be paid under FMLA. And then all of that would be reimbursed through tax credits.
And okay, that was my question. So we pay it and then get reimbursed.
Yes.
Okay, and that's at 2/3 of their salary, or of their normal pay.
That is at 2/3 of the normal pay.
Okay, and then they don't receive unemployment because they're employed.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sarah, we have another question. Is there a hierarchy that you could share that states which comes first, i.e. vacation, then paid leave, etc.?
So the federal pay would come first, and then the local or state sick leave would go into place. and then vacation would go after that.
Okay.
Did that answer the question?
I believe so.
Okay.
Is there a matrix of what the criteria for each eligibility? So I'm guessing that, Sandra, you're asking, do we have like a laid out criteria for each eligible act? Is that correct?
For the sick leave, it's all employees, just like it would be for California sick leave. So there's no waiting, there's no eligibility period. For FMLA, they have to have worked for the company for at least 30 days.
When will the employee guidelines come out?
I'm going to assume you're talking about from the labor commissioners, or is that one? The Secretary of Labor, the model notice, that'll probably be out before April 1st.
And so, and then Tom, if they were furloughed already, can we put them back on payroll before April 2nd and allow them to collect EPSL? Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, that's similar to what Adam asked, and yes, so you can bring them back on, and then as long as it's for one of those qualifying reasons, so if they need to take care of a child who's out of school, or they need to, or they're self-quarantine, then they would be eligible for the EPSL.
And I just wanted to add, but you know, if the company is having any type of financial hardship and you want to keep them on furlough, you can also do that as well.
Correct, correct. And just to make sure we're really clear here, to the point we said to Adam, you as the employer will need to pay the money up front, and then you'll receive a reimbursement through tax credits from the federal government. So you still need to be able to pay this out.
Adam, what happens if schools do open back up in mid-April or so? Can we assume that FMLA ends at that time? Yes.
Yes, if they're because the need for it is no longer there.
Correct. Before April 1st, is there a document you have available we can send to our employees that are caring for a child at home? This would allow the employee to plan their options. One of the things I would say to that is that as the company, you all should plan for what you want kind of the options to be. So if you already have an employee, if you already have employees on furlough and you want to bring them back on, you plan for that first, and then yes, we can send out some guidance for employees. Sarah, is that in line with what you would think?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, again, once the Secretary of Labor comes out with the model notice, that needs to be sent out to all of the employees, and hopefully it will be presented so that it's easy for them to understand what their options are.
Sandra asks, can you confirm if an employee is furloughed and becomes a hardship to the employer, they would lay off or terminate the employee?
So you're saying somebody who's just on the temporary layoff? Yes, they can lay off an employee. Any further questions?
Tom asked, why do you say shelter in place doesn't qualify? Didn't Gavin Newsom put it in place statewide? Make a state quarantine. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
It's okay if you want to answer that one. Go ahead.
So the shelter in place order is like a statewide thing. For this act, the only provisions that they're doing it under are CDC guidelines. So those guidelines from CDC for self-quarantine, as far as the illness is concerned, not necessarily the shelter in place order, so that we can hopefully cut down with spreading the virus.
Yeah, the CDC's yeah, I mean, basically we're not quarantined because we're afraid that we have it. So they want to make sure there's a distinction between quarantine and shelter in place. Any other questions we can answer?
Who has the burden of proving to the government that EPSL is valid? What if I pay an employee but they can't prove any of the reasons? Do I not get paid back?
That's a really good question. I'm going to have to assume, because this is still all coming out, that there will be a place where you can say this is EPSL. That's going to be more of a tax question as that's getting processed, and I know that there'll be more information as we continue to go through. There's still going to be a lot more information in the next 2 weeks as this kind of as they work out all the details of it. But I would also assume that they would give you the benefit of the doubt that if you say it was an EPSL leave, that they will pay it. Anything else?
There are no more open questions as of now in the Q&A or the chat.
Well, we're going to close this. I hope you all have a great weekend and a safe weekend, and find something fun and warm to do outside. And I do want to put up here that I know we have some people on the call, that were invited by some of our partners. If you want to reach out to us and ask us a question individually, you're always welcome to email us at hr@eoshr.com or give us a call at 510-822-2080, and we would be happy to help. Have a great weekend, everybody.